Okay, we'll get back to that issue shortly, and we'll also discuss that position now that the Coalition has spelt out, that the position they'll be taking on the mining tax when it comes to the Parliament for debate this week. But apart from the larger military, American military presence in Australia, the real guts, I guess, the substance of what President Obama wanted to say while he's here in Australia is this. Here he is.
Our new focus on this region reflects a fundamental truth. The United States has been and always will be a Pacific nation. As President, I have therefore made a deliberate and strategic decision. As a Pacific nation, the United States will play a larger and long-term role in shaping this region and its future by upholding core principles and in close partnership with our allies and friends. Our enduring interests in the region demand our enduring presence in the region. The United States is a Pacific power, and we are here to stay.
Now, Gerard Henderson, that's what gave the trip substance ahead of what the Americans call the fluff.
Yeah, it was an important statement. However, I think it's important also to remember that George Bush Sr., Bill Clinton and George W. Bush were also quite focused on the region, and it was George W. Bush who made the decision that the United States, and then followed by Canada, would sell uranium to India a couple of years ago. So it's not like President Obama starting something afresh, but he's probably put in a greater emphasis. Bear in mind that George W. Bush had 9/11 to deal with and the consequences of that, which did take the focus of the US away.
But isn't that's fundamental? That's what's different, is that they're taking their focus away from the Middle East, whereas George Bush did not.
Well, what's different is it's 10 years since that happened and times are changing. But George W. Bush didn't lose interest in the region. That's why he was very focused on India. And if you look at the early part of the Bush administration, it was very focused on China. But circumstances changed, and now they're changing again. I welcome President Obama's statements, but I don't think it's quite as new as some people have reported. I think it continues a policy, probably enhances a policy a bit, but it's not a new policy.
That's not the way that it was reported, though, in the United States. It got big coverage there, and they saw it as a real shift in emphasis.
Well, and the White House itself was describing it as a pivot, and that's the way they were talking about it. And I mean, it's never a black and white thing. Obviously, George Bush did not completely neglect the Asia-Pacific, and I don't think anyone ever suggested that. But it's the idea that as the two Middle East wars draw to a close, as America withdraws, it's refocusing or reorienting more of its foreign policy attention on the Asia-Pacific region and particularly the security interests in the Asia-Pacific region. And, you know, I sort of think from Australia's perspective, that's got to be a good thing.
In my view, the biggest decision made by any of the allies in the last 10 years with respect to the Asia-Pacific was the decision to sell uranium to India. It was made by George W. Bush. That was a huge decision. He was not focused on the region. Yeah. But there have been different emphases. And, of course, the White House is going to talk it up. I mean, that's what the White House press corps does. I welcome the decision. I just don't think it's as earth-shattering as has been interpreted by some journalists.
Yeah, look, I think it's on the significant side. I think it is. I mean, when Bush came into office, he was already seized of the Middle East before 9/11. Their preoccupation, that whole first Bush administration, was Iraq. And of course, he wasn't completely negligent or ignorant of the Asia-Pacific, but I remember Howard used to frequently say one of the few differences he had with Bush, he never thought Bush was sufficiently seized of the importance of the Asia-Pacific, and especially countries like Indonesia. And every single time Howard would talk to Bush, whether it over the phone or he'd be over there, he'd always say, mate, you know, Look down here. This is going to be very important.
Paul Keating would say the same thing about Indonesia.
Yeah, so I think now that, as Obama said, the tide of war's receding in the Middle East, all the last troops will be out of Iraq in a couple of weeks, and Afghanistan, they're going to draw down by 2014. It is a very now strong focus. I think it was more definitive than anything that's been said for many years.
It's not just George W. Bush. I mean, Bill Clinton was not uninterested in the region. No. George Bush Sr. was not uninterested in the region.
No, but things drifted between then and now.
Did they?
But the other angle on this, of course, is the military presence, and at 250, but rising to 2,500. But that's purely symbolic, isn't it? I mean, there are 40,000 American troops in Japan. There are 30,000 in South Korea. What's the real significance of 2,500 in Darwin, Northern Territory?
Well, I think, as I read, Peter Hartcher and a few other roads. It's a tripwire. It might not be a lot in number, but it is very important in its symbolism. I think that's the thing. And
the tripwire meaning that if anybody ever had designs on Australia, they know that they'll trip the wire, and the Americans are there.
And who's to know how many will be there in 10 years? I mean, that could.
But also gives the US a focus in the southern part of the Pacific, which currently the military deployments, the permanent military deployments, don't have. So whilst this is not a base, but it is a facility, and it's the kind of permanence to the presence. And 2,500 Marines is quite significant in terms of, if you consider what they're doing, which is essentially training, that's quite significant.
And it was obviously seen to have some symbolic import, certainly symbolic importance and definitional importance in China and Indonesia, given the sort of quite narky reaction from the Chinese government and also from the Indonesian foreign minister, who, you know, really seemed quite concerned that there could be a sort of tit-for-tat acceleration or build-up of tensions between the US and China in the region. Now, I mean, I don't think we need to overplay those reactions, but clearly they didn't think it was insignificant.
Yeah, the Indonesian Foreign Minister said that, but now the Americans are making new arrangements with Indonesia in terms of military cooperation. But perhaps the more interesting responses from China, and there does seem to be some concern expressed through their foreign ministry.
Yeah, well, I mean, Obama's speech was very bullish. It was in its language was very strong. I mean, in what we've said over I can't recall Clinton or anyone else talking in those sorts of terms. I mean, the rise of China in the last 8 or 10 years, you know, is something we've not had before, and this was very much a response to that, very much a reaction to China. You'd expect them to be, you know, this is pushback. I mean, Obama saying we are first and foremost a Pacific nation, always have been. We've bled in this region over the years for democracy and progress, and we're not going to see that reversed. I mean, he wasn't talking to anyone else but China, and yeah, you can expect, you know, they'll be butting heads over this.